Right, so we're talking inverse proportion. So I think we've already discussed a bit about inverse proportion. Okay. The last thing we did, well, not the last thing, but when we talked about this word proportion before, what did we do? What was it? It wasn't inverse proportion. It was.
Direct.
I'm just going to tell you off for shouting out, but yes, it was direct proportion. Right? We did direct proportion. Now, because you shouted out, you have to tell us what direct proportion means. 100% perfectly, no faults, otherwise you get an hour's detention.
It's when you find the when
Pressure's on.
it's when you find when you divide something into two numbers, like into a ratio.
Well, no, that's what we do to help calculate, but direct proportion means something about the two things, the relationship between the two things. Do you remember what direct proportion was?
The numbers in the ratio have to be multiplied by the same
Yes, so if we have direct proportion, basically it was as one increases, the other one increases by the same thing. So if we have ratios that are linked by direct proportion, do you remember the kind of situations I gave you? So, it takes you 30 seconds to eat a piece of toast. How long does it take you to eat 2 pieces of toast?
1 minute.
Okay. So the way we would write that as a ratio would be, it takes you 30 seconds to eat 1 piece of toast. If you were going to take, some people, no it doesn't, it's like 5 seconds. But if I were going to eat 2 pieces of toast, change my ratio, but direct proportion means that the numbers go up in the same way. Okay. Now inverse proportion is not like that. The inverse proportion was a different direction. Do you remember I gave you an example of inverse proportion situation? What was it?
So if it takes like 1 hour for one man to dig a hole 3 meters deep, how much will it take 5 men to dig a hole 3 meters deep?
Yeah, so we've got that kind of thing, isn't it? So inverse proportion is when one thing increases, okay, the other thing decreases. So we should write that. So, when one variable increases, the other variable decreases. Okay? So in this situation we just talked about, if it takes 1 man 3 hours to dig a hole. Is that the right way to spell it?
H-O-L-E.
Yeah. I'm just testing you.
Yes, I knew that.
If it takes 1 man 3 hours to dig a hole, how long would it take for 2 men to dig the same hole? So that's an example of an inverse proportion question. Okay? Can you think of any other questions that would be inverse proportion? Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do, rather than saying now, I'm going to ask you to have a think. I'm going to ask you to write down a situation that would be solved with inverse proportion for me, and then we'll offer what you think. So just remember, this question is all about the context in which it's in. Because if I said it takes one man 3 hours to dig a hole, how many holes would it take? You know, how many holes could I dig with 2 men? It's a different question, yeah? Alright? How long would it take 2 men to dig 2 holes? That's a good question, isn't it? If one man takes 3 hours to dig 1 hole, how long would it take 2 men to dig 2 holes?
At the same time.
The same time. So it's like the boiled egg thing. Yeah?
Can you do if it would take 3 men like 6 hours to dig a hole, how many would it take 1 man to dig a hole? Can you do that?
Yeah, so actually good point. So if you're given the information 3 men takes 1 hour, how long would it take 1 man? That's still inverse proportion, isn't it? Because if you reduce the number of men, what happens to the time? It increases. So just remember, this direct proportion, remember we said 60 to 2, it does increase, but it's not all about increase, because I could go, well, how long does it take you to have half a piece of toast? 15 minutes. So direct proportion is just about the same thing happens to both numbers, but inverse proportion is the opposite. So if one increases, the other decreases. If one decreases, the other increases. So I would like you to write one example of an inverse proportion problem, right, that's different to the person next to you, and we'll have a talk. Okay, so if you've got your ideas, we're going to start with what's probably the best one that's ever been said ever. Sushi?
If it takes 1 Sushizilla 8 minutes to destroy New York, how much time would 4 Sushizillas take to do so?
Is that an example, Linda?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there is a little problem with that one though, because a Sushizilla would spend so long talking about it. If he's on his own, it wouldn't take very long. 3 of them, they'd be like, well, where do we go next? Which shop do we hit? Yeah, so, you know, maybe actually not. No, good idea, pardon. Anyone else? Amol.
If it takes one person 5 minutes to sweep a whole tennis court, how long would it take 5 men to sweep 10 courts?
Okay. Sort of, but you've changed 2 things. So really, it definitely is the right situation, but you've kind of gone 2 steps, haven't you? Because if it was 1 person to do 1 court, we would then go 5 people to do 1 court, and then we would have to do 5 people to do 10 courts. Is that then a direct proportion? Do you understand? So you've actually gone inverse proportion and direct proportion in the same question. You have to be careful. You'd be a right horrible examiner writing an exam paper. That would be a nasty one. Archie.
If it takes 1 man 1 hour to make 25 badges, how long would it take 5 men to make the same amount?
Isn't that any
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Archie for you.
It's not that exact question, I just used badges because I couldn't think of one.
Badgers.
Badges.
Ben.
Make better.
The answer or
Your question? No, I don't want any answer.
if it takes 6 children 10 minutes to eat a cake non-stop, how long does it take for 1 child non-stop?
Depends who the child is.
Well, like
Yes.
they're all
Very
sushis. All sushis.
They're all sushis. Okay. Okay. Kid.
If it takes 1 man 1,000 licks to finish a lollipop, then how many? If there were 2 men, how many licks would it take to finish the lollipop?
Well, actually, no, that is quite disgusting, obviously, because they're sharing a lollipop. But how many licks would it take to finish the lollipop?
If 1 man.
Surely,
1 bite.
it's the same number of licks.
No, but it would take 2 men 500 because it's 500.
No, it would take them 500 each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've got to state that in the question.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's always going to take 1,000 licks to finish the, whether it's shared between 2 people or not.
40 boys.
Anyway, guys, see you later.
Eat it in 1 bite.
We'll-
Eat it in 1 bite.